Welcome to the Great Basin Seasonal Outlook for November through February. Over the last 30 days, we've seen warm temperatures across all of the West, and in the Great Basin, we've seen above normal precipitation in parts of central and northern Nevada and over small parts of southern and eastern Idaho into Wyoming. Otherwise, well below normal precipitation continues further south across much of Utah into southern and eastern Nevada and the Arizona Strip. So looking at some of our dead fuel moisture with these drier conditions, some of our southern areas, this middle chart for southeast Utah does show ERCs that are still above normal, but have been trending up and down depending on the fluctuations in temperatures and humidities with some of the cold fronts that have moved through. However, over western and northern areas where we have seen some moisture and at times much colder temperatures with these cold fronts, ERCs, even though they do see some upward trends at times, are still below normal for the time of year and really low overall across all of the Great Basin, even in some of our drier spots. Looking at our drought conditions, we have almost no drought across the Great Basin with the exception of southern and eastern areas. So far southern Nevada and Arizona Strip, and then over into eastern Utah, still some abnormally dry or even some small pockets of moderate drought along the Colorado border still exist. These drought conditions will likely persist at least through the next couple of months, and then we'll see as a pattern change maybe early in the year going through the winter, we'll see if those improvements are made. However, further north, we are not expecting any drought to develop over the rest of the Great Basin. So now putting some longer term trends together, looking at El Nino and La Nina, we were in a multi-year state of La Nina for quite some time, for 3 years, and we have been transitioning into warmer conditions, and now our current conditions are in a state of El Nino, which is the warming temperatures in the equatorial Pacific. And looking at all of the different model forecasts, we are expected to stay in some variation of El Nino through the winter, and then possibly some cooling, but still El Nino heading into the spring or fire season, and then possibly neutral conditions sometime by mid to late fire season. So we will see how that will affect our weather going through the winter and going into the fire season next year. So typically we do see impacts from El Nino in the wintertime, and typically that would show a more southern push of the jet stream, bringing storms further south. And traditionally we do see wetter and cooler conditions over the southwest into Southern California and also into southern areas of the Great Basin, with warmer and drier conditions further north across the northern tier of the U.S. So again, as you can see for the Great Basin, this does split things in half, and we typically do see some wetter conditions in El Nino winters down south and drier conditions up north. Looking at our observed precipitation over the last 1 to 2 weeks, you can see precipitation, again, has really only affected the northern third of the Great Basin, even some western areas over towards the Sierra as well, but very dry conditions still linger over southern areas of the Great Basin. And looking a little bit further ahead for our forecast through the early part of November, we will have another cold front moving through, or a series of cold fronts bringing some precipitation mainly to the northern third again of the Great Basin. However, we will see some lighter showers with one of the cold fronts for parts of eastern Utah that have really been on the dry side. But you can see from the schematic that the heavier precipitation will really be over for a little bit further east into Colorado, and we will just see some lighter showers into parts of Utah. So for the time of year, for late October, our snowpack is above normal in the northern areas that continue to see some moisture from these cold fronts, and is below normal further south in Utah that again have been on the dry side with these cold fronts. The 8 to 14 day outlook from NOAA shows warmer conditions continuing across the Great Basin through mid-November, and then any moisture will still be targeting the Pacific Northwest up into the northern half of the Great Basin, with still drier conditions continuing going through November over southern and eastern areas. However, for the next 4 months, we'll likely see some changes, probably not much through November and December, as this is still the early part of the winter, so any moisture will probably be more targeted towards northern areas of the Great Basin with generally warmer temperatures. However, as we approach January and February and El Nino really starts to continue to take hold, we should see more of a pattern shift of moisture with more widespread precipitation for the west, possibly in January, and then generally over southern areas from mid to late winter. And again, this would be more traditional for what we would see under El Nino conditions. So we'll see if this materializes, and then we will be watching how that affects going into the fire season as well. So putting everything together, obviously just expecting normal conditions for fire potential from November through February, which would generally be low fire potential for the Great Basin. The only exceptions that we'll continue to watch in more brief periods of time will be in areas that we still have plenty of carryover grasses from the new growth last year or in the spring this year that was carrying over and will be transitioning into dormancy and will still be around in the winter. So areas in the Snake River Plain, parts of northern and western Nevada, even parts of southern or eastern Utah, if we do have prolonged dry periods and then we see strong winds out ahead of a cold front before moisture moves in, we might have some brief upticks in fire potential that would typically happen again during the wintertime months in years that we have above normal grass crops. So again, in areas that we are seeing that above normal grass crop, that'll be something we'll be watching for more event-driven scenarios. Aside from that, generally low fire potential is expected, which would be normal for this period. So that concludes our seasonal outlook for this month. Check back next month for the latest updates.